Hello and welcome to the Successful Mentalist podcast. My name is Ashley Green, and as usual, I'm joined with my good friend and co-host, Aidan O'Sullivan. How are you doing today?
No, I also love that every time you introduce me now, you're getting more and more excited until I can see it in like a couple of months' time that you're just going to be, it's Aidan, like proper screaming.
Oh yeah, wait till episode 100. I'm just going to be like, yeah, midway through.
We need to do it like a massive party for episode 100.
Oh,
why not?
Episode 100. I still can't believe we're actually this far through. Like, it's insane, absolutely insane how many episodes we've done now. And as always, we do have a special guest lined up today. And I'm going to be honest, I'd never heard of this person before. Which, going by the other guests we've had on, we've had some pretty big names. This guy is also a pretty big name. It's just I obviously live in a cave. But it turns out the guy is an absolute genius. He has an incredible sleight of hand. He's fooled multiple magicians. He's worked with, well, I can't say who he's worked with, but he's just an absolute genius. And the deeper thinking behind the tricks is insane.
Yeah, honestly. Now, I've not known Andrew for that long, but... and you guys probably, some of you may have seen or heard of him on Instagram as Slightly Obsessed, as in sleight of hand, SLEIG. We'll put it in the show notes. He's absolutely incredible. I've known him for a little while, and this conversation took a really interesting turn. I mean, Andy's a magician, so he's not a mentalist. He's dabbled in mentalism and does a little bit of mentalism here and there, but he's not a full-time mentalist, which, again, you're probably thinking, well, why are we getting a sleight of hand card magician to come on a mentalist podcast? Believe us when we say that this episode is not just full of concrete gold on character, performances. What really is magic? We actually go quite a lot into the philosophy and like actually looking deeper into magic, which whether or not you like that, you will definitely get something out of this. This is an interesting episode because it's so different to all of our others so far. But we know that you're going to love it.
So without holding off for any longer and without waffling on, it's none other than Andrew Frost. For everyone listening or watching on YouTube, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? What do you do?
Sure. So I am a magician, I guess, kind of more in magic than mentalism, but I do a bit of mentalism. And people probably would most know me within the magic community for my Instagram, which I go under the name Slightly Obsessed. That's spelled SLEIGHT. So it's a pun because, as we all know, magicians really love a pun.
I love it.
So yeah, so Slightly Obsessed is kind of what I do. But in the real world, I kind of do close-up magic. But on Instagram, it's very much like kind of slight, heavy, technical card magic.
I mean, it's literally insane. I've seen so many of your videos and things, and every time you put something out,
you're incredibly kind when you
you say that, but genuinely, look at watching your work. It's just like insane. So again, highly recommend people check out your stuff. In this kind of episode, this interview, whatever this is, we kind of just wanted to pick your brains and just hear a little bit about sort of your thoughts. And I think one of the things that we'd love to hear, because obviously, as you said, that you're a magician that's not you're not a mentalist, but you've dabbled in that sort of area and you do a little bit in that sort of area, which is a really interesting perspective to have for a lot of ways, actually. So it'd be really great to sort of hear, what don't you like about mentalism? What is there anything that you don't like, or is there a reason that maybe you're staying to magic rather than making a full jump? Or
it's kind of a hard one. I absolutely love watching mentalism, and I absolutely I really enjoy kind of like mentalism as a whole. I think it's just personal preference. Like, what I love doing is just sitting around and fiddling with cards, and then that's suddenly turned into a career. I've had no direction with this. I literally just sat down with a deck of cards when I was like 19 and then just started fiddling. And then now I'm suddenly, kind of like nearly 10 years later, still doing it and seem to have a career out of it. So I think it's the medium in which I started, obviously has a huge impact on the way. And obviously, I don't know, like mentalism with cards, unless it's surrounded by other mentalism pieces, I think comes across kind of like less than mentalism as a whole. So I guess those two things. Like I said, I love watching it, and it's almost the most authentic that magic can be. And I love the idea of it playing kind of in a real space, like the idea of talking about things like psychology and talking about various aspects which kind of root and affect in reality, as opposed to having to force your spectators to suspend their disbelief. So there are aspects in which I've definitely applied to my own work from the mentalism world, but yeah, I think it's just the medium in which I work more often.
Yeah, I like that. And you mentioned as well playing cards. Obviously, this is a huge debate and one that we've covered on the podcast. Obviously, they've got their place in mentalism, but it's interesting to hear that doing too much of it can detract. Is it because you feel it looks too much like a magic performance, and because the audience is associated or associates playing cards to magic?
My opinion now, and it's forever shifting, so I mean, don't hold me to this, but I think my opinion at this point in time is that I'm purely focused on the effect for the audience. So if you do 7 or 8 card tricks in a row that are all with a mentalism theme or things like that, eventually it gets to the point, I think, in the spectator's mind, whether it be in that moment or the car ride home or waking up the next day. And this is by the way, this is not a unique thought, and I'll tell you where I kind of get this from. But eventually they just go, if he's professing to read somebody's mind, why isn't he just reading somebody's mind? Why does he have to use the medium of cards? And I think that is a very logical step for most people. I don't think that that's necessarily, all audiences, but I do think that might possibly be the majority of audiences.
An interesting point. It's something that I've played around with a lot myself. I'm actually rewriting all of my stage material and my close-up material at the minute. I've literally put everything in the bin temporarily, and I'm rewriting. Literally one of the things that I used to do close up all the time, just because it was easy and it kind of got me into groups, is that I would walk up to a group with a deck of cards, because somebody would then see me and think, "Oh, magician, come on in." And then I can just do one card reveal, like either a force peak. They're like, the method is irrelevant, but I'd reveal a thought of card or maybe 2 thought of cards, and then instantly jump into some other stuff. So I'd actually use it as an in. But like you were saying, like, it seems to be that people still associate that with magic. I mean, albeit I was using that as my lead in, but it's something about it.
Am I allowed to ask questions back to you?
Yeah, go for it.
Sure.
Cool. Do you think that you did the lead in that way because of the ease of transition from going, like, people just go, that's a magic thing, and then I can just very easily transition out of it? So it's like more, you don't have to do much work to explain what you do? Or was it because you felt maybe like insecure that you couldn't immediately go into mentalism, or was it to overcome any kind of barrier?
That's interesting. I mean, obviously I jumped from magic into mentalism, so I'd done card tricks and sleight of hand, so the cards were never really an issue in my mind. They were always there. I'd have them in my pocket at every gig, and everywhere I'd go I'd have a deck with me. And I kind of thought, well, people are seeing the cards and then seeing me. It was kind of like they were looking at my hands as I was doing something, and then they would see me and bring me in. So I kind of used that as the sort of as the intention. So I thought, well, I may as well capitalize on that and just use it as a way in. But
yeah, that's such a good idea.
I mean,
it's amazing the difference between, like, people just immediately are like, right, you come over. Like, if you're holding a deck of cards, they immediately are like, point to you and then bring you to your group. Whereas if you're holding a clipboard and a pen, that probably doesn't happen.
Well, Ashley's giggling there because that's something he does.
Well, my performance is a little creepier, but I end up looking like a creep to start off with, and people don't want me over to them, but I force myself upon them, and then go into this weird stuff. But that's a whole different, like, the opposite end of the spectrum for Aidan.
Yeah, but that's like again, that kind of ties into kind of your performance style, doesn't it? And especially if you want to create that atmosphere, that's just such a perfect way to go. I guess kind of, obviously that's more like Dan Sperry then, like the creepiness aspect.
Yeah, a little bit from there. It's kind of like creepy, socially awkward psychic. That's the sort of vibe when I perform. Whereas Aidan is some more upmarket. I'd say, well, when you look up, well, I'd say upmarket, upbeat, both of them. Kind of psychological performer.
Gotcha.
So two complete opposites, which That's why we're doing a tour together, which is a fun thing. Seeing as we're on the topic of approaching people, there are people watching this podcast, and it ranges literally all the way up to experienced pros, all the way down to people who have just got into it and are wondering how to like approach tables or approach people when they perform. And it's not just the UK we've got viewers, it's literally, I think, 33, 34 countries we're in now. So people all around the world. What would be your advice to them when approaching a table? Do you think it's good to go in with a card trick, something else, or even anything else, or just things to say? What's your advice there?
I think my advice is on this has kind of conflicts against what the majority of people need in that moment. So it obviously will depend on the context. If you're given 20 tables and you need to do them in an hour, you just have to kind of go up and be a professional interrupter, right? You have to just go up to the table, interrupt people's conversations, and just get in with your strongest material first, and then just get their attention and then just move through it. However, the gigs that I got when I was performing more regularly, I had time to introduce myself before I did any magic. So my thing that I always tried to do was to be a human first and then become a magician. So the idea was to go up to a table, introduce myself and ask why they were at the party. And suddenly, you're into a conversation asking all about them. And then eventually that gets flipped on you. Oh, so why are you here? And then you get to go, oh, well, I'm a magician. I've been hired as the entertainment. And then immediately that's a different thing. That's not, oh, I don't know you. You've immediately won them over. And therefore, like, you can just like perform magic and they're already on your side. You're not interrupting them. You're not having those kinds of awkward conversations. But again, it's completely dependent on context, because if I'm given, like I said, 20 tables and I've got to do them in an hour, you cannot take that approach. You just can't. You can't sit there and talk to anybody for any length of time. I got to a point where I could choose the gigs that I took. So I would take the ones where that was more appropriate.
I love that.
I love that. I love that as an approach.
I think it's one of those situations that, alongside the setting, the 20 tables in an hour versus a little bit more relaxed there, I think probably say that also jumps in on the performer as well. If the performer's maybe better at just powerhousing through material, again, that's just another something to think about. I kind of want to just jump in. Is a little bit, imagine like we're going through a full process at a gig. So we've got these tables, if you like, to go and perform for. Like, what's your process and what's your sort of thinking behind actually performing for them? Again, you don't need to discuss specific material if you don't want to, but like, what sort of stuff do you do, and how do you come about creating that set, if you like?
So I kind of come from a very difficult position, because I haven't performed since kind of like maybe 2019, the summer of 2019, maybe the end of 2019. So I really haven't done a huge amount of performing in the last year, and my philosophy and approach to magic has changed dramatically within that time. So my approach now would be very different to the way I used to approach it. The way I used to approach it, which would be much more commercial, is what can I just do with a deck of cards that's going to get me through 7 minutes at a table? And normally that means like I would just have 3-4 really strong effects, and I wouldn't rely too much on presentational angles or anything like that. It would literally just be, right, okay, I just want to, kick them in the face with 4 really strong effects, and then that's it. Nowadays, again, that effect first still remains, but I kind of want people to come and see me. I don't want to be that professional interrupter. So Aidan, I know you do shows, so it's that kind of thing that I want to be doing, whether that be parlor or whatever. I want people who have chosen to invest time in magic. I don't want necessarily them to know who I am, but just invest time and know that they're wanting to come and see magic. Magic isn't just a surprise thing. I'll probably end up inevitably doing the close-up gigs where you're a professional interrupter, but for the meantime, that's my sole focus. And so obviously it's kind of a very different approach.
I love that advice as well, which is getting people to know you. And it was one when I started performing at my residency down at the Magic Bar, the owner there said that it was like people come to see the entertainment, but it's nice if you can get them to know you, because not only do they then enjoy what you're doing, but they're going to want to come back because they're friends with you. They feel like they've established a new connection. And I think that just pays dividends when you then try and convert those people and try and get gigs out of them, try and flog them show tickets. I personally feel like they're more likely to go forward with a transaction like that because they know you as a nice guy and they know you as a nice person.
There's nothing better than being asked over to a group when somebody says your name. Like that, yeah. For me, that was huge. Because the difference between saying like, "Hey, Magic Man" or "Magic Boy, come over to the table." The difference between, "Hey, Andrew, would you mind coming in?" Like, there's just a massive difference between that interaction. And they'll introduce you by your name. "This is Andrew," and you'll be introduced to the group in that way. And that just is, I mean, on a personal level, I think more than a professional level, that kind of allowed me to survive through gigs, because I found the whole experience of that kind of, your standard close-up gig quite difficult from an artistic standpoint, I guess, in that like you're there as kind of a secondary thought. And so adding the impersonal nature on top of that, it just gets you down, or it got me down. Some people can live with that kind of like lack of identity. But then when I was being introduced as Andrew, or there's such a much more personal impact that has.
I mean, I completely agree. It's one of those situations that, again, I completely resonate with your thoughts there. And again, it's something that I've actually sort of neglected. I mean, people have said, like, actually go in and be human. And that's the most important part. I think I read it in Maximum Entertainment, like, convey your humanity as the key point. And I seem to be finding as many other different ways of trying to do that than actually just going forward and being a normal person. Like, yeah, it just seemed to jar. I don't know.
But do you not think that it's difficult to do that? Because normally the character of the magician has to be an infallible person. Like, it's very difficult to show fragility as a close-up magician. So it's very hard to kind of like show your personality in that respect. Like or at least I found it very hard when you're meant to be doing all of these amazing things to then show either any sign of vulnerability or anything like that at all.
It's so tough. I mean, I would argue that the majority of close-up magic in terms of gigs and stuff, like from a gig perspective, if you like, I think a lot of close-up magic is actually bad for magic as a whole, because it takes, as you said, it takes this huge like thing that magic should be insane, right? It should be something absolutely phenomenal. It's like more of an emotion than it is a thing. But over the years, it's been crammed into being tricks, and then being crammed as secondary entertainment. And now it loses that edge, because you don't get to build that magic, or you don't get to build that character, or you don't get to build the emotion that magic kind of is. So I say that, but like I've seen and I felt like close-up magic performed for me that has literally blown me out of the water. But again, I would still argue that most of that has come from a casual setting rather than a gig setting. So I don't really know what the point that I was making there was. Like, close-up gigs are bad. Like, I don't really know, but I think it's tough. I think it's really, really tough.
Some people, I'm sure there are people in the world. I bet Etienne Pradier has none of these concerns. Like, I mean, he just goes into a room and chaos ensues. David Williamson, all of these people who you kind of imagine in a close-up setting can just they make it their own. It's not that. I think particularly in the UK, you're dealing with probably a more skeptical audience than you would be in other countries. I don't know if that's necessarily true. That's been my experience looking at kind of like America versus the UK in terms of skepticism within the audience. I also think that people are more polite, so are more fearful to react. So I think I understand why, restaurant magicians in the US have like a fun time doing restaurant gigs. Whereas in the UK, everybody's immediately kind of got their arms crossed and sitting back and like just don't. And there's that initial thing of not wanting to be fooled. So the way that I tried to get around that, I was never particularly successful. But one of the ways that I tried to get around that was just a tiny script at the start that you can just say that just is to get over that initial hump of like, this guy's going to fool me and make me seem like an idiot. So one thing that I used to say, and I'm pretty sure this got me rebooked a bunch of times, was I would, as soon as I started performing, I'd be like, I just want to tell everybody I'm not professing to be supernatural in any way. And the only reason that I do this and I want to show you these things is because I experienced them firsthand. And I experienced them to the point at which my brain exploded and it felt amazing. But the only way that you can get there is to understand that I'm not doing this for real. I'm only creating the illusion that this is real. And so therefore, if you want to relax and get into that point, you'll enjoy this. But as soon as you see it like a puzzle and you try and work it out, you're just going to have a bad time. And then immediately that prompts either questions or further conversation, which is fine.
I love
but
that.
It also means that then you're not professing to be this kind of like, you know, I'm going to make you seem like an idiot because I'm showing you a card trick. And then you can kind of, you know, just play off of that.
That's a problem, like, which I've had when I do restaurants, and it's people go, oh no, it's just a magician. And I think it is because there's so much bad performance out there where people do make people feel a little bit silly, and they don't understand that it's not about the tricks, it's about the experience and it's about the memories they take away. So I love the fact that you've got a beautiful little line which then just recaptivates people and makes them know that it is about the overall experience.
Was just one thing that is kind of interesting based on that. I mean, obviously at the minute we're still talking from a magic perspective, and one of the big things about mentalism is that from a mentalist's angle, like we want people to believe that we have these abilities. We want people to believe that we can do these things. Like, is that sort of crave for credibility? Do you think that's a problem for mentalism to that sort of degree, or is it?
I don't know, because I mean, who's the best mentalist of all time is Darren Brown, and he goes out at the beginning of every show and says it's not real. So you're kind of like, you can take it any way you want, I think, and it depends on whether or not you want. Again, like, you know, I think it maybe goes back to character. If your character is, this is absolutely real and what I'm doing is real and you should think it's real, then yes, like absolutely go down that route, and you want to kind of create that credibility and you want to create that experience for your audience. I find the gray area way more interesting. It's like that black box, right? Like when a plane crashes, all they know is that a plane crashed. They don't know how it crashed, right? So the plane crashing isn't inherently interesting, but what is interesting is how it crashed. And it's kind of the same, I always think, with magic. Like, if they understand the effect, but you're almost alluding to what's happening. Like, that's kind of, you know, you see a lot of people doing that now. I think this stems from Darren, but the idea of using that pseudo psychological approach as a pseudo explanation for what you're doing, or using like NLP or whatever it is that you're saying or professing to be doing, that's more interesting than the method you're using, right? So even in that setting, you're saying, I'm not doing this for real, right? You're just, but all you're saying is that you're saying that you have means in which you can make it appear like you're doing the things that other people would profess to do. So I think that I think it's really important to understand within your character what your statement is. Is your statement, I'm absolutely doing this for real? In which case, then you can do that across the board and you can apply that to all you do. Or is it you playing with this gray area? Or is it like saying it's absolutely not real, but I'm going to give you the experience that it is? Like, those are three distinctly different areas, but you can, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be one area, but you can draw from all of those different parts.
That reminds me slightly of something when I was on Banachek's podcast a few years ago, and we was talking about a very similar thing. And he said, when I perform, I go out there and I say I'm real in terms of psychic stuff. But after speaking to Banachek, I took a leaf from his book, and he said, the problem is if you go out and say you're real, if people catch you out, say, for example, you're not real in that moment, you're not doing an actual reading, you're using some sort of special stuff to gather some sort of information on them. If they catch that, then that's completely just ruined everything you're doing. Like, you can't come back from that. You can't change your character, and like, you can't return. So he was saying, don't set yourself up for failure. And it's something that I took, and although I present myself as real, I say to my audiences, what I do is a combination of, is based on my intuition, but I have a background in magic. So for example, I have a hobby in magic, and then that then allows me to do a psychic routine, picking up on their relatives and stuff, but then I then go into card tricks, and it fits my character perfectly. People then aren't trying to catch me out. And if people really dive into it, I try to avoid saying out and out I'm real, unless it's I just want to have fun. But
Of course.
it is combining and saying, like, I've spoken to Aidan in the past, I do have a background in magic and I do have a hobby in magic. It's weird, like, being open about that. People then like believe me more in regards to what I'm doing, so they believe my performances and they go, oh, all right, cool, you're real. Like, it's weird. Like, I've
it's
opened up.
honesty, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's honesty and vulnerability. It's that moment of saying you reduce your ego by saying it isn't real. So if you immediately go in and say I'm not real, that aspect of them feeling as though they might be fooled is gone. Like, you completely get rid of that, and then they can just enjoy it for what it is.
I think it's important, yeah, just to take it away from the actual trick and just make it about them, and then it's just about the experience, which I think is the most important thing. And like Colin Cloud says, what do you want your audiences to remember when they go away? What do you want their reviews to say? And I think that's when you start getting into that sort of mindset, then it just helps your overall performance just grow.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think you have to go through all of that nitty gritty, don't you, to then come out at the end with a much more like holistic thing. I feel like I've been in magic nearly approaching 10 years. I think like 8, 9. I feel like I'm only just on the cusp of understanding what I actually want to do. Prior to this point, I probably thought I had an understanding of what I wanted to do or how to approach it. But I think now I'm only really starting to even just build small little bits onto the philosophy that I'm going to use for potentially a long period of time. And that will obviously ever be changing. But I think it just takes so long to get to that point, and you have to really invest in it and really spend time kind of on that journey to get there. So it's I think that's an incredible, like, that's almost like an end of life thing when you're performing, like, to get to that point where you can go, what do you want your audience to think? Because you can ask that at every stage throughout that process and you'll have a different answer. So but it's such an important question to ask. For sure.
I mean, it kind of touches, like, I mean, episode 3 of our podcast was on the topic of why mentalism, and it was literally drilling down. And again, you can apply the principles that we shared to magic or to literally anything. It is to really find that purpose of why are you doing this? Why are you passionate about this? Why are you interested in this thing? And as soon as you know that, then you kind of know your trajectory. But again, as you said, you can ask yourself you can ask yourself twice, 3 to 100 times in the same gig, and you're probably going to be at least think of multiple different answers. And I think it's something that I would argue a lot of the magic mentalism, the whole world, the whole community, if you like, it's missing that level of extra thought. I mean, nowadays there seems to be a lot of pressure on what's the new coolest trick, how can we build the new gimmick, how can we make something. I mean, don't get me wrong, that kind of area, it's really pushing the art forward in a like rapid ways. But if I feel like a lot of the industry has been lost to the commercial creativity rather than the pursuit of magic. I don't really know the point I was making there, but it kind of just jumped to mind. It's like I just feel like I need to say this. And
I think I kind of agree with you in that people focus on what's new and novel, and rather than on what they like, what they want to do. Yeah, because it's far easier to go, that's new, that's exciting, I'm going to get really excited by that, than to sit there and go, okay, so I liked this trick, why don't I do that anymore? Why do I like doing that? What is it about that particular thing that I like? Is that giving the audience the experience I want them to? Is there a way that I do it that isn't as clever as fancy, but is better for the audience? That's like a huge thing for me recently. I've been this sleight of hand nut for years, like a complete move monkey, dive really hard into like technical sleight of hand. And then it's only really recently that I went, oh, yeah, okay. Well, invisible deck exists. Like, it's that kind of a thing. Yeah. And I think you have to go through that trajectory to get to that final point. But it's you have to strip away everything that you thought, and also your ego. Oh, I really want to put in a diagonal palm shift, you know, like
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Even if you can do it incredibly well, is there a way where you can be completely hands off instead? And it's, you know, you have to take away like huge swaths of your ego. I do have to say that a lot of this thinking comes from the people that I'm hanging out with, which is a guy called Alex Hansford and a guy called Brad Hodgins. And Brad has this amazing philosophy where we go like really in depth on stuff, like, you know, oh, maybe you could think about it this way, and then immediately his response is just do the trick. You know, you just do the trick. It's quite a nice philosophy, because I think you can get bogged down in the kind of almost the unnecessary and unapplied theories of magic. And instead it just kind of like gives you this streamlined process. But it also means, like, you know, when you're in the middle of a trick, you'll get in the middle and go, oh god, why am I doing this? I should just be doing the trick. Which then you're applying it in a different context where it's just like, oh god, you know, I'm doing 5 sleights to get a card reversed in the deck when I could just be using an invisible deck. Or, you know, like, why am I doing this when the process could have been done so much earlier, or whatever it is. So yes, I think, but it's all in that same vein of like, you have to go through the journey to get to that kind of that point. But yeah, thinking on that deeper level will get you to that end goal, I think.
It's so weird. It reminds me of when I was back at the Magic Circle at the Young Magicians Club, and I remember when I was a young kid, they were saying, "Oh, learn some proper tricks." Like the mentors there, and one of them ended up working for Dynamo, and like he was saying, learn some proper tricks. Don't rely on these gimmicks. And I started it, and then I've kind of gone full circle. I started to do the magician's packet tricks and gimmicky stuff, and then learning sleight of hand, and now I've come back, and now I go to magic conventions, and I literally feel like out of place. Like I've said it to Aidan so many times. I know so few magic tricks and methods, and what I do is simple and down to the core. But when I perform to people, I don't care about that. I want to go for an emotional experience for them. And through doing like the most simplistic things, I've had some surreal moments. I've had people come up to me half a year later and saying, dude, you changed my life. I broke up with my wife and it was the best thing I've ever done. Like just from a simple trick. Like, and I was like, wow. And like my biggest round of applauses, which I'm getting from closing my my theatre shows, are from not theatre shows, my little performances in the bar I perform at. I end with an invisible deck, and it's I would happily say it's the biggest round of applause you'll hear out of any magician in that bar, and I finish with a damn invisible deck. But it just proves that the tricks don't matter. It's just about the other stuff.
I think the tricks do matter. But
well, they do, like what one of the other people we were speaking to. As long as they're good tricks. But to a certain extent, there's other things to focus on.
Absolutely. But like here's some examples. Aidan, just before he went to Blackpool with Christian, came to the flat that Christian and I both live in. I'm talking about Christian Grace here. For those who are unaware, Aidan came to the flat, and I showed Aidan like a bunch of card magic, and Aidan appeared to be fooled by the majority of it, but all of that stuff is either like self-working, or like uses principles that he definitely knows, or uses moves that he definitely knows, or all of those kinds of things. That's where my magic is now. Here's a good example that I've been using recently. You fool lay people with method, but you fool magicians with process. So if I hold my hand flat and I have a coin in my hand, right, and I just hold my other hand flat and I wave over the top and that coin vanishes, right? Could you tell me what I just did? Could you tell me the method that I might use?
With high likelihood, yeah.
Yeah, like, so am I allowed to mention products?
Oh, sure, yeah, of course, yeah, please do. So using a flat hand across another flat hand would be a raven, right? It would be the raven gimmick. Like that's we could probably hazard a guess. However, if I reach down with a closed hand and I pick up a coin off of the table, and I hold it up just kind of normally,
and then I open my hand and it's gone, that could still be the raven. That could still be the raven,
True.
but magicians will not recognize it as the raven. That is the only difference I now have found between magicians and lay people, is I perform pretty much exactly the same tricks to both. The only thing that I change is just the ever so slightly like subtleties or process to just cover my tracks a little bit, or to make people think that I'm going in a certain direction, which I'm not. So that's literally the only difference I have found between like a layperson and a magician. You can show them the same tricks, they just need to like just have a little tiny tweak, and then that's it.
That's insane. That's again, I've never even considered that, but now you mention it, it's like exactly. And just I do want to put it out there. The way you described my feeling of being somewhat full, or slightly full. Nah, I was blown away. I have still got no idea on any of this stuff. And I felt like crying in the moment because I was just so blown away. But if it really is, like, as you're saying, like the simple and self-working, like if you've really boiled it down to that, I just think
that's how you make it appear like you're doing this, is like that you just, you try and, like a lot of the tricks that I do, even if they involve some sleight of hand, the final moments, I want to be like this.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I approach it now, is that I want to be either the final effect is in the spectator's hand, or I'm far enough away from the deck that it feels as though I've never touched them, or it feels as though I can't have any impact over the final reveal, or whatever that is. The best example of that is the oil and water I showed you, Aidan.
Yes.
He like the deck goes in their pocket for the final reveal, and it's like, so you're miles away from everything, which is that's that kind of a thing is just stuff that I kind of tried to boil my magic that I do for magicians as well as the stuff that I do for lay people and kind of combine them. So Ashley, I'm sure if you just did the stuff that you were doing, but you just changed the process just slightly, you would probably find that all of the stuff that you do with the same presentations, everything would just work for magicians.
We've kind of alluded to it at different points, but I kind of want to just throw it out there. Like, what makes good magic? Like, what is good magic? Like, I know we've been speaking about different ideas, and we've spoken about the idea that towards the end of the effect, like you want to be hands off, or you want it to be clean, or you want to be present in the like what. I mean, we could talk about that in and of itself for hours, but
I mean, I don't know. I've been doing it 8 years and I still don't know. People have been doing it for much longer and still don't know.
Do you think it's maybe easier to answer what magic isn't?
I think when what good magic is for me at the moment is it isn't a visceral reaction, which is what a lot of close-up magic is, which is the card appears in your mouth. Oh, that's very startling. I better applaud. And then actually this goes back to what we were saying before, but in the drive home, they go, do you think he just put it in his mouth? Yeah, maybe. And if you can explain the method away that quickly, I'm not saying card to mouth isn't a great trick. It's a great trick. It's a really good trick. I'm just using it as an example to show this.
Of course.
And by the way, this theory is not mine in any way, shape, or form. This is a thing which is written about in Hector Chadwick's book Miscellanea, and I believe it's called Audience 1, Audience 2, or Audience A, Audience B. And he talks about the person being fooled in the moment and then going away and then being able to work it out. But the best magic stands up to both of those. It's where this is, I'm trying not to do this, but Aidan, if you think about the oil and water again, right?
Yes.
And you think about the process in which that happened. When you leave, the way in which that's done should hold up under scrutiny to the point at which you cancel out methods in your own head as to how that could potentially be done. Any good magic isn't just there in the moment, but stays with you after that point. So that when you're talking in the car home, you almost like talk your way out of all of the other methods, and then suddenly you're like, oh my goodness, there's absolutely no way. And I mean, like look at Darren's body of work. look at Williamson's body of work, look at Chankanasta's body of work, all of those things where, you know when you feel good magic, but then you also leave and then you go and you're still thinking about it and you're still thinking like, how could that potentially even be? There's no feasible solution to how that could potentially work. And Christian Grace's material, like when I saw level 1 for the first time, that I had no concept of how that could even work. When Christian showed me the full routine for Switch 1, a new product that he's going to be releasing, is like both of those things I completely floored by, and there's no feasible solution. My good friend Ross Taylor, almost everything he shows me, that same thing. Brad, or Alex, all of these people who do amazing magic. The one thing that I always think is that it sticks with you after when you leave. You can't just explain it away in the like on the train home with your buddies. I think that's as close to a description as to what good magic is.
I like that.
As I've got.
I think that's real magic. Like tapping into that personally, I just feel that's beautiful, and it's taking it beyond the trick. And it's I really want to see this oil and water now that you've mentioned it. I'm so keen to see it, man.
You don't want to see it, because you will literally have restless nights for weeks. I'm still crying about it.
One thing I wanted to mention, when you mentioned it kind of halfway through this podcast as well, was when you're saying about obviously yourself and your performance, do you bring other skills in? Do you bring other interests into what you do, like other hobbies and stuff?
Probably, but not consciously, and definitely not in my patter. So, I mean, I played music from a fairly young age, and I think a lot of the dexterity that I have with sleight of hand and stuff was developed within that world entirely. Actually, here's something that I absolutely do bring from other places, is my approach to practice, which has been completely and utterly defined by music and sports, both of which I played to like an okay standard. I've talked kind of like previously in other places about this, but I can talk about it for a little bit if you want as well. Please now do. The way that I've approached practice is magic tells you how to do stuff, but not how to practice it at all. Particularly sleights. Routines is kind of like you just have to go through them with a repetitive action, but there are ways in which you can approach it that are cleverer than others and will make you more efficient. But sleights in particular, which is where kind of my area of expertise is, and obviously this can be applied to anything from nail writing to billet switches, to anything. I don't treat it as a repetitive action. Like 10 minutes of practice where you are actively engaging in improving what you're doing is so much better than sitting in front of the TV for 5 hours doing the same thing over and over again. And the difference between the 10 minutes that you do and the 5 hours is astronomical. So the way that I kind of define those two things is, one is fidgeting and then the other is actually practicing. And so you kind of have to think about it on that level, I think. And so the way that I approach practice is I videotape myself and then I problem solve based on that video. So I have an image in my head of what I want it to look like, or what I want it to not look like not look like a move, or to not look like a transition. And I want it to feel like it's just nothing, like I'm laying the cards down on the table, or I'm passing the cards from hand to hand, or, if it's a billet switch, I'm just moving the billet just ever so slightly. Whatever it is, you have an image in your head and you film yourself, and you have to change things, what you're doing, to try and get closer to that. And you're going to constantly fail, but you'll know that each time you get closer to it, you'll be able to then just reiterate that. And that's been a huge thing for me in magic, because people told me that I had a pretty quick transition into kind of sleight of hand and my ability within that field. And I think it was only from my saxophone teacher making sure that I broke certain bits of the song down and just improved on that particular section through the use of drills. Or it was my my basketball coach making us constantly do suicides if he saw us switching off for a moment. Okay, you were in autopilot, go and run laps. It's that kind of training that just allows you to kind of really think about the way in which you approach practice.
I think that's so valuable there. I mean, it's something that gets said a lot, and I think if you're looking at, again, it applies to sort of mentalism from a stage perspective as well, because it's so vital to wherever you can. I mean, I've neglected it. It's something that I absolutely kick myself for, but there have been shows that I've done that I've not put even just like my phone at the back of the room to film the show so I can watch it back. And again, as you said, be fully in that moment of thinking about it and rehearsing or practicing that same bit. And it's just so vital. And I think it often, with mentalism especially, it tends to get neglected, partly because so much of what we do is based on an audience. We need people to be able to practice our material for a fair chunk of it, especially when you look at the world of like propless mentalism and psychological mentalism. It just plays around with there. But I know Ashley uses, again, you mentioned earlier that you've kind of got just a few methods that you use, and you use them to the best of your ability. So it'd be interesting. How do you approach practice, Ashley? I know this is.
Oh, crikey. Oh,
yeah.
Oh, God, I'm the worst one to do this.
Well, no, this is what I know this, and this is kind of why I threw the question at you.
Well, when I want to do a new routine, I'm constantly running it through my head, and then I just, because the difficulty is for me, like, I can't film myself doing a reading by myself. I've got to get someone else there to practice my skills and picking up on things and stuff. So I literally go out and do it. But I've got a really weird memory like that. So I always go away and I'm like, what didn't I like? What did I like? And I'm constantly like analyzing it in my head.
Do you write anything down or like make notes, or is it literally just all?
No, it's just all up here. My brain is yeah, like I constantly, I always pick up flaws, like when I go to people, and like I constantly just remember them. So like I usually leave gigs and I was just like, because I'm thinking of all the negatives. But I think it's just important to pick up on, and it's through like literally just going out and doing the negatives, doing like constant failure, that I've been able to grow and be and do a decent mentalism act, at least. Hopefully I do.
Well, by the amount of reviews you're getting, it's by the amount of glowing reviews that you're getting all the time from lay people. Like, you must be doing something right.
Yeah, I guess so. But I haven't really filmed much of my performances, but it's just because the set I'm in is difficult for that. Like, I used to do a lot of close up, and I've recently said to Aidan that I want to move more into the stage area, where, like, obviously, like you were saying, and my own thoughts on it in the past were like, people were there to see you, whereas at a close-up gig, they're there to see the bride and groom, and you're just another thing in the room. And it's like, so that's where I want to move into, and it'd be a whole lot easier to film then. Just put GoPro up.
When I did close-up stuff, I don't know how it is for you guys, but I used to pitch the idea of having a table and then setting up like with a table. So then you have people actively choosing to come to you, which was a nice thing. Jared Kopp talks about this in his Penguin lecture. I don't know if you guys are fans of his. I'm huge fan. He does mentalism, like really good mentalism stuff, and kind of does mentalism with cards. That's brilliant as well. But he talked about like being put on the menu at restaurants as a way to get people to invite you over to the table, which just changes that power dynamic. Setting up a table for yourself, and then the other one is is it Secret Room? Have you ever heard about that?
I don't.
Alan Hudson. Alan Hudson is a UK magician, and he talks about setting up talking to whoever's like house party or event it is, and setting up a place or event that you can go to, like where it's a secret room and you tell people to not tell anybody about it, but just tell people that it's good, or if you enjoyed it, that you enjoyed it. And then it kind of creates this air of mystique around that room. And then inevitably people say, oh my God, there's a magician in that room. Or like, oh my goodness, there's a guy that's doing mind reading in that room. And then suddenly, you know, you get more people wanting to come see it, but the only people that are coming to see it are people that want to see that kind of thing.
That's brilliant.
So
that's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, those are kinds of ways in which I've at least attempted to get around that initial like thing. But then also you're in an environment where you can potentially film yourself as well. So you can also do that.
I think it's something that I actually tried. I've done that once with the whole idea with having a table at a gig, a close-up gig, but I had a designated area. It was actually for a Peaky Blinders themed party, which was pretty damn cool. But I had an idea. I had a routine. I was trying to think of material that I could do close-up that was mentally that could apply to Peaky Blinders. I had this whole thing in my head, and I came down to I boiled it down and I found something. It's a version of so it kind of links to something that Darren's done, because let's face it, Darren's done everything insane ever. Yeah,
but he has literally done everything, I think, at this point. Yeah.
There's nothing there isn't anything else. The world of both magic and mentalism, which Darren's successfully dabbled across both. He's done everything. There's nothing left. There's no plots unless
even if you take it to this extreme, he's made people kill people. Like name anything he's done it. So, yeah.
Is there a piece of either Darren's work or anybody's like in the world of mentalism that's kind of stands out to you? Is there a piece that just really sticks in your mind? And is a really good, maybe even a really good example of just good mentalism?
Yeah, man. There's like a few, but the one that immediately sprung into my mind, there's a guy called Mike Pashota, who I've started getting like people on Instagram are like, you're a fanboy. You're just like fanboy of this guy, because he's my favorite magician. He made me completely rethink the way that I did magic and approach it and everything. He's the resident bar magician at the Magic Castle, but he showed me this trick that I think he released on Penguin. I can't remember the name of it. That's terrible. And he did this thing as like, oh, it's a throwaway thing that I sometimes do at gigs if I don't have anything else on me. And then proceeded to do basically like a 3-phase mind reading routine that just completely blew my socks off. And in the moment I was just like, yeah, God, that's really good. And it was one of those moments where it's so annoying when you're kind of like reacting to something and then a magician is so eager to show you method. And then you're just like, and then immediately shows you method and you're like, God damn it, I didn't want to know. Or like whatever it was. But yeah, that one in particular stood out to me. The one that really got to me for a very long time was the one where he's sitting in the chair next to a psychologist, and he does name disassociation.
Yes.
Just nails every single one. Just boom, 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 boom. And then gets to the end and then just is like, name a word, and then just gets it bang on. And those kinds of things where it looks like it's just, there's no other conceivable way than he's just reading their mind is kind of like, those are the bits that I really, really enjoy. A lot of his live stuff I'm massively a fan of. I went and saw, I think it was Infamous. I think it was Infamous live. And when he does in that, I think he does like a super reading. So he just like stands somebody up and then just seems to know everything about their life, even though they're randomly selected. And just, that kind of thing is just crazy.
It goes back to what we were saying earlier about that idea of like good magic. It's like when you go away and you think about it, and the only conceivable option, and I think is like that was real. And I think for mentalism, it's, well, Darren's mastered it. He mastered it from day one, for God's sake. But it is being in that position where you can tailor your performances to the point where your audience only think what you want them to think.
Yeah.
Without ever guiding them overtly to that point. I think that's that's the real sort of testament, I think.
There's also a massive difference between being really, really fooled by something and just kind of like there's a different thing where you're like emotionally invested in something. We have a joke, like me and our friends will have a joke about potentially being like emotionally fooled as opposed to like intellectually fooled. Like that's a good like difference in those things. Yeah, I mean, good magic just, it's like the ground's been taken out from underneath you, and then you're like scrabbling up to try and cling on to any kind of semblance of method or any kind of semblance or anything else, and then you kind of almost submit to it, and then you get to the point where you don't want to know.
So much. I mean, I know that we've spoken so much about all areas of magic, and that's been the focus. We've really looked at magic because that's what you do, Andrew. That's your complete specialty.
Yeah,
but there is so many lessons that I think that you've shared with us here that can be applied and extracted to mentalism in millions of ways. And I think there's going to be so much gold. We're going to get a lot of keen ideas. So where can people find you?
I think the best place is probably Instagram. So that's just Slightly Obsessed. So SLEIGHT LY obsessed.
we'll put your links in the description.
I was going to spell out the whole thing. Got halfway through, gave up. But yeah, so that's probably the best place. I'm pretty good at answering my direct messages, but don't get too upset if I don't. I'm trying to take a break from it, because I got to that point where I was like looking at people's accounts that I respected and then getting disappointed that they didn't follow me. And then I was like, you sad man, 28 years old, and that little follow button doesn't appear. You're a sad act. Like, so I'm trying to separate myself from it for a period of time. I still actively look at it, because obviously you want to see what the young guys are doing and then get sad about it as well. So,
so basically what we're saying here is, go follow Andrew on Instagram and just flood him with messages, and constantly, everybody don't follow him. Just be there and just show off and just find a way of making Andrew feel upset, as a way of saying thank you for all of the gold that he's just shared in the last hour.
Yeah. The only other thing that we haven't really touched, I don't know if we did, but touch upon, is creative process. That was only if we had like kind of like 5 minutes, I could just very quickly, because I've got
do it. I know that's something that we actually said before we went live. Like, would love to hear your creative process, and then never spoke about it.
My creative process is really easy. I am not very creative. Like, I'll just say that outright. I'm not very creative. People like Ollie Mealing, Christian Grace, like all of those guys, almost, it's as though kind of like people get that. Well, people of that kind of standard get just a eureka moment, and it just comes to them, and then they just have this beautiful, almost fully formed idea. Then they work at it, and then suddenly it's this amazing thing. I very much just struggle through like just iterative process. I have no clever way of going about creativity in any way, shape, or form. I kind of have like an idea of some description. Like, it would be really nice if I did a sympathetic card plot, and then I just research, mine out methods, and just try and find what I can, seem is the best version of that effect. And I just draw upon as many different things as I can. So yeah, my creative process is pretty boring in terms of like a response, but that's the only way that I've found that has worked, is just to be as knowledgeable as you can about it, like in particularly specifically, and then also to just continually go at it. Like, just don't quit and don't second guess. I think actually that's something that both magicians and mentalists do, is they compromise way too early, whether it be on performance, whether it be on, like you were saying, on the depth of thought, whether it be on kind of like, oh, that's kind of good enough, like, and those kinds of things. But the really top flight performers, they just don't stop. Like, it's a constant kind of like mining of improvement until they get to a point where kind of they seem head and shoulders above everybody else, but really it's just, you know, constant improvement.
I feel like I've said all of that to every point you've made. But I just love the way that was our creative process. Yeah, we'd love to hear your creative process. It's a bit dull and boring. I just find stuff and keep going. Like, that's it. But yeah, completely agree.
I'm pretty applied in my approach to everything. I don't really like the kind of the airy fairy approach. If I can apply it, then I use it and we'll talk about it. But otherwise, I try and avoid saying stuff that I don't actively use or anything like that.
That's so interesting. Well, thank you honestly so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, no problem.
I've learned a lot. I know Aidan, I'm looking at him, he's been blown away, he's learned a lot. I'm sure everyone, no matter their skill level, has learned loads from this. So honestly, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.